fruitful, potentially fruitful, to give an alternative, self-sustainable growth model to the territory. Then we have the environmental meaning, which relies on the activation of British rules of the human settlement. And then we have the territorial meaning, which can be found in the possibility of fostering a new territorialization process that starts from the community itself. Okay, here I will just briefly mention this because I think we are running out of time. We have to be careful, like there are a lot of similarities with localism, but we have not to think that deliberative democracy is sort of application of localism in a way, because on the other hand, I would say that deliberative democracy has something more to offer, and these can be seen in the fact that deliberative democracy can help, can, let's say, fix some weaknesses that localism present. Indeed, devolution does not necessarily mean democratization. We have seen it in the minimalist form, the dangers, let's say, of localism, if it is seen just as a mere execution of decisions and priorities of the central government. Then we have the second challenge, which is that localism may reinforce existing power inequalities, like the devolution of power, responsibility, and resources may, of course, reinforce those who are in the power at the local level. And I think that deliberative democracy can, let's say, be complementary in fixing this potential problem in basically including the weak actors in the decision-making process. So in order to make localism more participatory. Then the third challenge is the fact that one-off participatory forums do not equate to local democracy. Sometimes localism, let's say, can be and participation, like participation from a local point of view, can be seen as just the organization of a few meetings, and all the decision making can just be exhausted in these one-off meetings. And especially the macro version of, I think, deliberative democracy can be helpful in this way, in considering the role played by civil society in the public sphere. And then we have the challenge, the last challenge, which is the problem of disconnectedness. So localism may restrict the scope, space, and impact of participation. It means that, for instance, when we talk about scope, we say that the localism may confine the debate to the local level. So it can maybe prevent people and citizens to talk about broader issues. The space also, localism, and even in a way deliberative democracy, if they don't take into account the fact that local communities, especially nowadays, are embedded in a larger socio-political environment, of course, this can be detrimental to decision-making process itself. Okay, here we are at the end of, we should be at the end of the presentation. Just wanted to understand the question how we link the local and the global perspective, because our project actually relies, as I said, on both dimensions. We have the first approach, which may call functionalist approach, according to which the world's people are unified into a single society, and decisions are partly or totally determined by global needs or cosmopolitan institutions. We could call this like a thesis, which say neglects the needs coming from the local societies. The second approach is the localist one, which can be seen as the antithesis of this process, of this dynamic. According to localist, the localist approach arises as a need to counterbalance the global, in a way, global dynamics. If you have, it may be interested to take into account, for instance, the work by Hart and Antonio Negri of like published in the midst of the 90s, Empire, and I think it gives a perspective on this. So basically, localist approach is played on this dichotomy, because between the local community, because between the local level and the global level. Actually, the third and final approach is the localist approach. That is the approach that we wanted to adopt in the project, which basically marries, if you can say like this, the equilibrium between the valorization of local peculiarities and the widening of decision centers at the global level. Okay, for me, that's all. Okay.
Thank you so much, Massimo, for giving us these fundamentals, but also linking it with the project itself. I guess it's very useful because when analyzing the profiles that we will have today, the attendance, we saw there were many different actors, many different people coming from civil society, policymakers, young people. So I wanted to specifically welcome you. I see many young people, so thank you for coming. I hope you are interested in the topic, and I hope you'll also get to have an active role today. We will have afterwards, maybe you already have some questions to our first speaker, but we will have afterwards a Q&A, so we'll have time for your questions. Please do not feel afraid to ask, even if you think it's I don't know, it's a very basic question. We are all here to learn. And as I said, we are from different profiles. We are from different organizations. So it's okay that we don't have all the same background. So feel free to ask your questions. Now allow me to introduce our second speaker, Ieva Cesnulaityte, right? Ieva is a founding head of research at Learning at DemocracyNext, and she will provide a keynote speech on elements of a successful deliberative process. You have the floor, Ieva. Would you prefer this one or?
Yes, thank you. And I'll take this. All right. Hello, can everyone hear me? Perfect. Hi, everyone. Very nice to be here. Nice to meet all of you. My name is Ieva Cesnulaityte. I came this morning from Paris to meet you here, and I was asked to speak a little bit about what are the elements of a successful deliberative process. So thank you for the introduction by the colleague here that discussed a little bit about deliberation and localism and all those things, and maybe I'll bring some of those what he was talking about more on a practical level. So I hope you're gonna find my presentation interesting as well. So Democracy Next is a very new research and action institute that we founded half a year ago only. And what we work on is really thinking about the future of democracy, about how the next democratic paradigm might look like, and building the new democratic institutions for that paradigm that are really built on participation and on deliberation. And at the heart of what we believe in are three things. First of all, we believe that we need to give people agency and dignity through participation to be active members of society and of the political system. Then we can distribute political power through sortition or representation by lot. This was something that wasn't mentioned today, so I'll go into that a little bit later to explain what it is. And channeling collective wisdom and enabling people to find common ground through deliberation. So we've heard what deliberation is already. Our work really focuses on citizens' assemblies in many of their forms. So citizens' assembly is really an expression of deliberative democracy. So it is a small representative group of people that is brought together for a significant amount of time, usually from, let's say, 3 to sometimes 3 days to sometimes 15 days over several months to deliberate over a specific policy issue and go through stages of orientation and learning about the policy issue, deliberation with facilitation, so smaller groups and then bigger groups, to reach some kind of a rough consensus and provide recommendations on that policy issue for different policymakers. So this can be local authorities, regional, national, even the EU level authorities, such as the Conference of the Future of Europe that has happened here actually recently. And then those recommendations go back to the public authority. Public authority has a responsibility to really consider them and to provide their feedback back to the citizens. What happened to their recommendations? Where they implemented, where they, in a way, refused, and explain why. So taking this model of a citizens' assembly, previous to my work at Democracy Next, we have collected close to 600 examples of citizens' assemblies, citizens' juries, and other models of deliberative democracy from all across the world, a lot of them actually happening in Europe, and a lot of them, over 65%, happening actually on the local level. And we wrote 4 different reports about citizens' assemblies. So the different trends, how they happen, what are the good practice principles of running such citizens' assemblies, how to evaluate them, and how lately these forms of citizens' assemblies have become more permanent ways of taking public decisions. From all of that data, we actually identified a deliberative wave that is now rising over the past 10 years. And you can really see, and here there's no data from 2022, but if there was, it would be skyrocketing, because last year there were very many citizens' assemblies also, especially on climate change, but other kinds as well. So this is really a phenomenon that we are seeing now at the moment, and it's really exciting actually how it's been proliferating lately. And these good practice principles that I want to focus on today are really based on all of this data of these 600 examples that we have found, we have identified, and we have analyzed, and we saw what works and what doesn't work when organizing a representative deliberative process, such as a citizens' assembly, a citizens' jury, or another one. So these are the 11 good practice principles. All of them are really important. We are not going to have the time to go in all of them, but I will cover around half of them in more depth, those that I really find the most important for a successful deliberative process. But for an overview, you can see it's really to have a clear purpose for a deliberative process, to have accountability of what happens with the recommendations, transparency in the way the process is run, so everyone knows, when it's taking place, what kind of sessions takes place, what kind of information citizens are given and considering throughout their recommendations, who's speaking to them, and all of that. Then the important element of representativeness, so really making sure that that group of people that you bring together is randomly selected and stratified on demographic criteria to make sure that it really represents the society at hand. So it's really a microcosm of community. Inclusiveness of this process, so it means that you put effort into reducing barriers to participation, such as providing participants with compensation for their time or childcare facilities and things like that, to make sure that the timing of those deliberative processes are when citizens can actually afford to come and participate, that there is clear information provided to them, and they're able to actually base their recommendations on a diverse portfolio of in-depth information to really catalyze that deliberative element. There is group deliberation, where you ensure that all members participating have more or less equal time to speak, so all of their opinions can really be heard. There needs to be a significant amount of time for people to actually go in depth into those issues and to know one another, to really understand that other people's point of view. So they can't be super short. They need time to take place. There must be integrity of the process. So if you want the recommendations to really be legitimate, you have to make sure that the organizers are usually different from actually those people who are receiving recommendations. So you cannot have politicians involved in organizing an assembly, as well as privacy of the members that are participating, of the citizens that are participating. Their privacy should be respected and anonymous if they don't want to be later made public their names after the process is over, and evaluation. So it is really key to make sure to learn from the lessons and from the process of how it happened and what can be done better next time. So in terms of the purpose, this is the very main mistake that I see sometimes being made when organizing a citizens' assembly. Should be very, very clear what questions citizens are going to answer and why, and frame the question in a way that is not too wide. It's not about the future of everything, but it's not also a very narrow yes or no question where we are not able to really explore and go in depth in different dimensions. So the key to success is really to research very well that question and frame it in a way that it is conducive to meaningful recommendations. Accountability is really about, from the very beginning of organizing a process, making sure that it has a connection to a public decision-making body, because citizens are only going to spend their valuable time deliberating and producing recommendations if they know that they're going to lead somewhere. People always feel if their time is wasted or not. We all usually do. So you really have to show people how the recommendations will be used, who is going to be the one responding to those recommendations, and when, to motivate them to even sign up for such an activity that requires significant amount of their time. So the element of representativeness is also key here. The legitimacy in a deliberative process really comes from this representation of everybody, or demographic representation of the community in the room. And we achieve that by running something called a civic lottery. Let me show you how it works and what it is. So civic lottery is a two-stage process where first you have an invitation sent to a random sample of households, to really a broad range of households, so varying of depending how many people you want to finally have in your group, from 2,000 to sometimes even 30,000. And they are invited to sign up to participate in a citizens' assembly or another deliberative process. And from all of those who agree to participate, then a second sample is drawn, where we really make sure that we get the balance of gender, age, socioeconomic background right, in terms of in the city of Brussels. So it really should match the community that you are wanting to represent. So this process really has to be done very rigorously, and making sure including underrepresented communities and all of that, because this collective intelligence on which the idea of deliberation is based, it's really at the heart of it, is this representative group of people. Another element of success is to have a very broad range of information available for citizens about the policy issue. It has to be, information from, if the policy is like how we should address one question or another, the people in the room should have access to different stakeholders that might have competing views on the issue. They need to have information around the necessary budgetary constraints and all those kinds of things, sometimes even technical information that is given in them in a clear way, but a complex, in-depth information, so the recommendations can really be based on data and facts, and within the remit of what is possible to then implement. And yeah, as I mentioned, time is really something of essence, because it takes time for people to meet one another, to start trusting one another, to get in depth of understanding the issue, and then to slowly build towards that rough consensus, which is really something that's one of the benefits of running a deliberative process, because at the end, it's not that you get, as mentioned, an aggregation of what individual people think, but what is on what everybody can agree in the room. It doesn't matter that people have all different backgrounds and different points of view. What are the things that they can all finally agree on once they have deliberated, which is extremely valuable to be able to move forward with a certain policy. And one of the last elements is one of my favorites is evaluation, because by running evaluations of these processes, we are not only able to learn what we did well, what we didn't do well, but also we're able to show the rigorousness of the process and ignite more trust in whatever are the recommendations that we have actually, it was a democratic process of a high standard, the same way that we monitor and observe elections. So one of the last advice that I would perhaps leave you with, the thinking about the future of these citizens' assemblies and some of the latest examples that have been implemented, especially here, actually, in the city of Brussels, there's already 2 institutionalized deliberative processes that are actually permanent. So one of them is the Francophone Brussels Parliament, and they have mixed deliberative committees where parliamentarians, together with randomly selected citizens, are deliberating over different policy issues on an ongoing basis. But there's now a new one, an itinerant climate citizens assembly that tackles these types of questions as well in Brussels, and many more across the world. There's already 11 different models happening across the world. And so when we run a one-off citizens assembly, I recommend really keeping in mind from the very first steps that we are doing here, how can we keep in mind perhaps making this more permanent in the future, because it is easier to run something that you've already done and you know how, you've established that infrastructure, you built up that knowledge, and if you keep that in mind from the very start, I find is really helpful, and this is actually the future, and this is where the field is going forward. So thank you so much, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Eva. I hope our partners took some notes, because one of the methods that we have in the project is citizen assembly. So I hope it was useful. I'm sure it was useful for our partners. Thank you again. And if you have questions, please note them down, and we will take them after the keynote speeches. Now, allow me please to introduce Professor Jean-Benoît Pilet, professor in political science at the Free University of Brussels. He will focus more on exploring different methods, different deliberative methods and forms of deliberative engagement. And you have the floor.
Does that work like this?
If you just push on it so it becomes green. Yeah, I think.
Does that work like this? No?
If you just go closer.
Like this? You don't hear me at the first? Okay, so I'll take the microphone. I was expecting that at the end people would. Okay, let's go. Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. I'm very happy to be with you this afternoon. I actually have the chance to be with you twice, because I've been also invited to the second panel. So if you get bored after one, sorry, but you'll have another round. So why am I here today, and what am I going to talk about? So I'm coordinating a project with several universities that tries to assess all citizens, but not only citizens, perceive and receive those new forms of participation that are attached to this concept of deliberative democracy. And so what we're trying to do is to first try to understand a bit better, okay, but how exactly is it organized? And in that respect, we try to approach what the OECD has been doing very impressively, trying to really understand, okay, what are the practicalities? And then once we know about those practicalities, the many decisions that have to be taken when you design a deliberative process, what is the impact of those decisions on the practical details of your design for different actors? What is the impact for people who are invited to participate? We've just mentioned that. So letters are being sent, and most of the people would just not reply. So what can we do about that? Is the design impacting that? What actually could have an impact in increasing the share of people who say, yes, I will take the time to participate and I want to reply positively to the invitation? What's the impact for those who eventually decide to participate? So what is going to increase their active participation, their satisfaction with the process, their commitment to the process? What's the impact on the many non-participants? Because even if we have an impressive wave of deliberative events and of citizen assembly, that remains limited to a tiny portion of the population. If you think of 36 events per year in 24 countries, that's less than 2 events per year. Even if you have 100 persons in each of those events, that remain a very tiny portion of the population. So what's with the non-participants? What elements of the design would have an impact on that? And then eventually, those processes are attached to public authorities that remain within the perspective of representative democracy. They have to implement the recommendations from the citizens. So what is going to impact the way they receive those recommendations, and what is going to impact their willingness to put them into practice? And so what I'm going to present a bit today is about that exercise, the many decisions that have to be taken and the kind of consequences they might have. And then later in the panel, then we're going to focus on the specific case of younger citizens as recipients of those deliberative instruments. So now that you have the broader perspective, let me try to, so what is the title? Let me try to talk about the different formats of deliberative democracy, or if I had to change the title, how to try to make sense of the mess of deliberative democracy, which is a bit exaggerated, but is revealing. There are many, many ways deliberative democracy is put into practice. Citizen assembly is probably the most institutionalized, the most common, the most researched, and therefore the most consolidated, but there are different instruments, different types of democratic innovation that are around, and that indeed creates a kind of a mess which makes it difficult to really navigate into that. So I'm trying to go into that and start with what all these processes have in common. And they don't have that much in common. They have in common what has been said in the first presentation, and that's first the idea of deliberation and the idea of inclusion. So the idea of deliberation, all of these processes have in common the idea that you should not simply ask once to citizens what they think, but you should invite them to discuss, to exchange, to deliberate, and to try to reach decisions or recommendations. That's one thing that all these processes have in common. The other thing they have in common is that they want to be inclusive, so they want to attract citizens. So they want to break up the monopoly of elected representatives over policy making. So they want to associate other actors and especially citizens. But beyond those two principles, it's very hard to really see a common ground in what those deliberative instruments do. They have different design, they have different decision, and that's what makes it complicated. First, there is a wide variety of way of thinking about the purpose and the accountability of those deliberative instruments. The first decision to be taken is what exactly are we asking citizens? And it has been said just before me that the question should be very clear. But not only the question should be very clear, but the exact follow-up of the deliberative instrument should be decided. And in that respect, what we see when we try to do an inventory of deliberative instruments is that there are very different purposes of those deliberative instruments. Some would go for, sorry, I've lost my nose. Some would simply go for, we want citizens to deliberate, to lead to a more mature point of view within the citizenry about a specific topic. And you would find some more awareness deliberative forums. So that's the first example. Then, going a bit further, most of the deliberative instruments would hope to formulate recommendations that would then go to public authorities. But that's one purpose. Another purpose would be that you would actually take decisions that would then be implemented. And that's what you will find, for example, in participatory budgeting. In participatory budgeting, the assembly of citizens has a specific budget, in some forms of participatory budget, has a specific budget that they can decide how they will allocate it. So they actually take real decision. And then you might also have deliberative instruments that would be rather used as instruments of evaluation. So they would not come before a decision is being taken, but they would come at the end of the process once once it has been implemented and you want to evaluate from the perspective of citizens what actually are the things that are working well, what are the things that are to be improved, and what are the ways to improve those things. And what we see in research is two things. First, and it has been mentioned, if you don't really know what's the purpose of your deliberative instrument, people simply don't show up. People simply don't participate. They come to the first meeting and then they drop out. And then the authorities would not really know what to do with the deliberative instrument. And sometimes the funny thing is that those public authorities that are designing the process don't know what the process would be about and therefore don't know what to do with it. So the first decision is what you do. It has to be very clear. But another thing that is important is that it has to be very clear that it would have an impact. And that's what research across different universities is showing, is that if you remain at the stage of public awareness, if you remain at the stage of policy recommendation, you're below a certain threshold that would really activate participation. We've just cited the example of the new citizen assembly on climate change in Brussels that has sent the letters around and has a response rate of 2%, which is not, and it's a common level. So it's not nothing exceptional. If you move up the local level and you go to the subnational and the national level, you would range around 2, 3, 5, maximum 10% of people who reply. And what research has been showing is that precisely because people don't want to waste their time in something not only that is unclear, but also something that has no direct impact. So even saying your formulate recommendation, those recommendations would be presented and discussed within Parliament and government seems to be not very good for participation. So it has an impact on that. Last element, if the perceived consequences of the deliberative instruments are absent, then you have a backfire effect. You have a very nice recent study conducted by colleagues from the University of Leuven who clearly show that in terms of political trust and in terms of trust in democracy, what is worse than not having any citizen participation is actually having participation and then having public authorities not doing anything with those recommendations. So there is a direct backfire effect. So first element, what is the purpose in terms of what's the question, but what are you really going to do? And ideally, how are you going to make sure that at least some parts of the recommendation would have clear consequences? Can be very clear consequences. The Irish example, sometimes some of the recommendations go to a referendum. That's a clear consequence. The referendum can turn down the proposition, but at least you cannot say we did nothing with none of the proposal. So first element to discuss, purpose. Second element to discuss, the format. So what kind of format do you have? And there also you have a wide variety. You have differences in terms of length. Some of those processes would take one evening, a weekend. Other of those processes would take several months. If you consider, for example, the last citizen assembly, climate change assembly in Luxembourg, it started in February 2022, and the recommendations were presented by citizens in Parliament in October 2022. So that's a huge commitment. And you can easily imagine that this has a direct impact on who is willing to participate. It's very different from spending several months of your time, even if it's not a full-time job, but still you should follow up, you should discuss. So it has a direct impact on participants, on those who are invited, but it has also a direct impact and sometimes a difficult impact on the non-participants in the public authorities. What research has been showing is that for good participation and good deliberation, you'd rather have longer processes, but for inclusiveness of participants, you'd rather have short processes, and for public attention, you'd rather have shorter processes. The media will stop reporting. It's not, you don't have a clash every day, you don't have a big story to tell, and therefore there you have to find an equilibrium that you know is never going to be perfect. Longer participation, better deliberation, longer participation, less attention, less interest among non-participants and public authorities. Second point of format that is very relevant nowadays is whether you go fully online, fully offline, or in between. if I would have had such a talk before COVID, I think the answer would have been, do it offline. It's always better. It doesn't work online. But with the COVID pandemic, we've seen several processes that were using partly or totally online formats and that have been able to function well, to attract a wider range of participants, but again, with negative side effects, especially on the non-participants, but also on the media who have more difficulties to report and therefore to raise awareness. A third element of design that should be reflected upon is whether you go for something permanent or whether you go for something that is more of a one-off. And indeed, there are several cases of more permanent processes that are taking place in Brussels, in the Dutch-speaking community of Germany, in other settings. And it's interesting to see how it's going to develop. What we see for now, but we see very little because there are very few. I think the Brussels and there are very few cases where you have many years of practices. But what we start to see is, again, that if you go for something more permanent, you increase the quality of the debate, you increase the quality of the deliberation and of the recommendations that are formulated. But then, by definition, you have difficulties to maintain interest for non-participants. It's harder to attract attention with something permanent than with something that is just created for once. Why? Because then the public authorities are going to make a lot of efforts to report on something new. The media are going to be interested, and therefore it could raise public awareness. If you start to have something every 6 months, then it's way harder to attract attention for each and every event. So here again, a balance to be found. Then the participants. Another element of great variation in the way deliberative instruments are being organized is who participate. First, about citizens. You have great variation in the number of citizens, but also the profile of citizens. You have deliberative instruments with self-selection. So that means everybody can participate, you just have to show up, but it has a bad impact on representativeness. Or you can go for sortition, which is going to improve representativeness, but also is facing and reaching its limits. As I've said, if you send 10,000 letters and you have an ideal response rate, let's say even of 25%, which is really achieved, you still have 3/4 of your population dropping out. And what we know is that those people have different profiles than those who accept to take part. You can correct that with stratification, but even with stratification, what we realize is that you don't perfectly correct. You can correct for gender, you can correct for education, you can correct for professional background, but you have very much difficulties in correcting for political and social attitudes. You'll get people who might have indeed a lower last degree, who might be from more marginalized groups, but you would still have within those groups highly interested people with a specific view on the topic that you're debating. And an interesting experiment in that respect can be found in the UK, where they decided that on top of the traditional socio-demographic stratification criteria that you use in most citizen assembly, they would add voting behavior criteria and political attitudes related to the topic. They had a citizen assembly on Brexit, and they wanted to make sure that they have pro-Brexit and anti-Brexit participants. So is it something that we want to implement in each and every deliberative instrument? So it's not only about your profile, but also what you think in relation to politics and to the public. That's a complex issue. It makes it more complicated to have broad participation, but at the same time we know, and that's something that we've shown within our team, it has a major impact on public legitimacy. An easy way to target and an efficient way to target and to criticize a citizen assembly or any other deliberative forum is to say, look, they all think the same, and what they think is completely different to what the population at broad would think. And that's something we see especially with climate change assembly. Public authorities, politicians, media, but also non-participants having difficulties accepting recommendation from climate change assembly that they perceive to be only populated with pro-climate activists. And they're not completely wrong. We've surveyed the last Citizen Assembly on Climate in Luxembourg. We surveyed the participants on their climate attitude, pro-climate or more climate skeptic. We compared that with the population, and what we see is that 90% of the participants had pro-climate change attitudes, which is 2 times more than what you find in the general population of Luxembourg. And so if you see that, the impact that you realize is that you have difficulty to foster interest, but also trust in the deliberative instruments if people perceive that the participants are politically too different, too distant from them. So again, here, there are elements that we should reflect upon. Another element regarding the participants is it only about citizens? Or do you want other actors to be involved? For example, the first Irish Constitutional Convention, the Brussels, the regional parliament deliberative committees would involve citizens plus politicians. So it's not purely citizens. It has advantages. It facilitates the transition between the recommendation from the deliberative innovation to the representative authorities, but it has disadvantages. It might also, and we know it, might also reduce the willingness to participate among the participants who really don't trust politicians, don't want to have anything to do with politicians. But it's not only about whether you want to include politicians. Do you also want to include representatives of civil society? There are several instances of deliberative events where the main clash was not so much between politicians and citizens, but between citizens and representatives of civil society who believe that it's their role to collect the will of the people and to transfer it into the political arena. And so what's the role of civil society? What's also the role of expertise? Can you have, and there are a few experiments of deliberative events where you put experts and citizens together, not with experts giving their opinion, but meaning enlightening the debate, but with experts being the participants with citizens. So being part of deliberation, but without a different role, with the same role, participate to elaborating policy recommendation. And again, we see that it has good effects. It increases the perceived legitimacies of those events, but it has bad effects on some participants who would then talk less, participate less, because they feel that they're in an asymmetrical position. So all these elements, plus the fact that you should also decide on what's the topic, and for now, it's true, it's much about climate change, citizen assembly, but that's not always been the case, and it's actually not the top one topic if you cover deliberative innovations. But what I think is the main message here is that there are many, many decisions. There is no one size fits all. But you should keep in mind once designing your event, what do I want to achieve? So what is it exactly I want to achieve? And what are the consequences of the design decision that I'm taking? And there is no ideal scenario. There is no model that guarantees high participation, diverse participation, good deliberation, wide awareness in the public about the event, and an easy transfer of what's happening within the deliberative event into the representative system. So you should decide what ingredient is better for what is your main purpose. If your main purpose is wide participation, then the best ingredients are different than if your main goal is in policy impact. So that's a bit a sad conclusion and a pessimistic conclusion on which I'd like to be challenged. But that's what we can see for now on basis of scientific research conducted on those events. Does not mean that I cannot be proven wrong, and I would be very happy to be proven wrong with a perfect one-size-fits-all model, but so far we haven't seen something going in that direction. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. I was planning to ask a few questions, but I see that we are short on time. So I would like to give the floor to participants directly, maybe even young participants, because as you can see, our main target audience for this project is young people. So if you have any questions, please let us know. And I will ask kindly Camila if you could be able to reach participants with the microphone so they ask their questions. Thank you so much. I mean, everyone, actually. We are all young by heart. I don't know.
Hi, I think I still qualify as young, so I'll just go ahead. Thank you very much. My name is Pieter Velge. I'm a volunteer with 2 Brussels-based organizations working in the field of citizen assemblies, GMIL, G1000, and Agora. The question we ask ourselves often in the organizations is, how can we make sure that we have more legitimate processes, and maybe also in the end even come to a certain situation where the suggestions by the assemblies are almost on the same footing as suggestions by members of parliament and so on. So I was wondering if you have any ideas maybe how to build or make sure that these recommendations from the citizens can be more authoritative. Maybe, I don't know if you can think of some case studies to eliminate the way towards more acceptance of these recommendations. You mentioned also evaluation after the processes, which I think is also an important part of it. But maybe, I don't know if you can give us some examples. Thank you very much.
Please let us know which speaker you would like to address your question. So, I mean, in general, it's if you have a specific name in mind.
Yeah, maybe Ieva and Jean-Paul.
Thank you.
Do we reply directly, or do you want us to collect
Questions.
Maybe let's collect another question. So we would have.
Oh no, yeah, it's okay. Do you feel young?
I feel very young. I feel, and I love participation, but that's also because my preference is to be with other people and speak. I have a lot of verbal self-confidence, but not all people have that. So that is actually what my question is about. How, and that is for you, Jean-Benoit. Have you measured what participation preferences people have? Because a lot of these deliberative processes kind of, you know, you have to say something. You have to, even though your hand is shaking, and then you need to be able to speak up. So yeah, how have you monitored that?
Thank you so much. So please, you have the floor.
Hello. So the first question was around how we make sure that we have maximize the influence of implementing recommendations and trust in them and their legitimacy as well. So I would go, I think one of the very important elements is to, from the very start, secure also, if possible, cross-partisan support for the deliberative process that's taking place. Like the way that we work in Democracy Next, this is really like one of the first elements that we do. We engage in conversation with, and this doesn't matter whether it's, you know, local, regional, or national level, with all of the actors that are key, and then making those types of decisions. So really making sure that there is buy-in across party spectrum for a deliberative process to take place, and also making sure that the kind of process and the kind of question that and the merit that is there very well fits into the policy cycle and decision-making cycle. And because sometimes what I find as well is that there is this need to run an assembly on top of the policy cycle, and then those kinds of recommendations, they are not necessarily good timing to then be in either parliamentary debate or you know, executive processes as well. So I would highlight that. And then for more trust and legitimacy in those processes, the evaluation, what I mentioned, but also could be observation, international observation of the process that is being run as well. Yeah, I think this would be my main points I would highlight.
Thank you. It's indeed a very complex question. There's a bit of consensus on some of the mistakes that you should avoid, and indeed, being at the wrong moment in the policy cycle is one of the most common mistakes. Is that you have a process that is going to take place and formulate recommendation either when the decision is already taken or when you're 3 months before the elections, and so it's very unlikely that you still have the time to implement. So you should. Another easy mistake is not thinking about a detailed process of what follows the deliberative events. So having something very detailed with clear milestones, but also resources. I think putting resources in following up what happens with the recommendation. So that means that if it's related to a parliament or to a government or to another public authority, that you actually have a member of staff who is going to follow and report and invest in that you have someone who is going to check that the agenda of reporting to citizens and participants would be there. So that's kind of easy mistakes, but then it becomes much more complicated in saying there is a best one size model. What we can see is that policy evaluation in relation to administrative authorities seems to work well, because then you're a bit less into the political debates and you're more into, we have a policy that we have implemented and we want to adapt it slightly and to fine tune it. And there it's easier because it's less politicized, but it's probably quite efficient. And then I think another element that is complicated is that policies take time to be implemented. So it's also hard to say, okay, but we don't have any success to mention after 1 year, but that happens with lots of policies. What I would say is that making sure that the policy recommendation, because that's what you have most of the time, are going to lead to an actual political debate, not a small consensual debate where everybody agrees, but a real political debate, something that is going to create polarization. It's actually a good way to make sure that these institutions are part of the political process. Because even if those institutions function under the idea that consensus and common ground should be sought, we know it's not the way politics is working, and it's not necessarily the way politics should be working. And so making sure that you actually leave space to politicize and polarize debates from those deliberative events onto the broader debate is probably something that we should pay more attention to. And in that sense, I was citing the example of Ireland with referenda. It's fine if you have a referendum and at the end of the day, the public reject the recommendation, as long as you have an actual debate. It's fine if parties take different positions. Some would support some of the recommendation and make them part of their political campaign, while others are going to oppose. And I think thinking in that respect, and not that it should be a, or would I say, low volume process, but it can be actually an high contentious, polarized debate, not always, not for all debates, but that sometimes we go for that. I think that's probably what we should also pay more attention and be less scared about. It's fine if you don't have consensus after a deliberative event.
Thank you. If we have one last...
There was another question.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I'm very sorry because I'm eating most of the time, but on the second question, I don't want to... So 2 things. The ones who are there and who are shy, I think there are several examples of good support that could be brought. So Brazil has a long tradition of those events, and what they brought in are the concept of a support person that you can have with you that would help you to reformulate what you do. So that's for the very, very practical details. But what is the other part of your question is that indeed, when not everybody wants to participate, it's not only because they are shy, it's also because, and that's what we see, and that's directly in the core of our project, the share of the population who wants more participation is a minority share in the population. So the assumption that everybody wants more participation is a wrong assumption. Doesn't mean that it should not be a goal that we pursue, but starting from the premises that every citizen wants more participation by himself or herself, or even without myself taking part, I'm still fine if there are more citizens participating. That's a wrong assumption to think that the majority of citizens think that.
Thank you. Unless there is a question still, yes, a last question before we go into a break. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Abdul Latif. I am a news blogger and a founder of a startup related to trade and technology global marketplace. My question is related to the European deliberation democracy. How different and innovative is this European deliberative democracy as compared to other powerful democracies existing in the world?
Who wants to reply?
Yes. Yes, I just didn't get the detail, like if we're talking about European deliberative democracy or like European democracy, deliberative democracy. I have to say that deliberative democracy is a practice that has been started being implemented not only in Europe since the 90s, but also in other countries. For instance, in Australia, like there were a lot of deliberations happening there as well. I have read quite a lot about, for instance, the methods to increase, let's say, inclusiveness and like in the decision-making process in Australia by, for instance, let's say, create separate sort of structure forums. So to respond to your questions, I think deliberative democracy is a concept that was used in many parts of the world. I think especially in the Western liberal, let's say, world. Yes. So this would be my response, actually. Yes.
If I may add, I just wanted to also say that there are a lot of indigenous practices in different communities across the world of, deliberation and in local councils, in different informal institutions that's really rich in the world. So we are talking about these more like Western conceptions of deliberation that are really structured here and, clear processes and stuff. But these are also things that are coming and have been, building up globally. And I think when we think about deliberation in different places of the world and different regions, we should really think what's already been happening there locally, what are the traditions, and how can we start from those seeds and see how it can develop and blossom in a diversity of ways in different regions, instead of imposing some sort of, we know some of the good practice principles that work, and perhaps we should share that knowledge and with that, what all of those lessons learned, but we should also be really open to learn from those indigenous practices that are very rich.
Thank you so much. We are really short in time, so I'm really sorry, but we have a break now. So if you want to still ask a question to our speakers, I guess they won't mind while they enjoy their coffee. So let's have a 20 minutes break and be here in 20 minutes, please, so that we have time to discuss the next roundtable. We have 5 speakers, so it could be a bit busy. Thank you so much, the speaker again, and see you in 20 minutes. Thank you.
So
Hello, welcome again. So I will kindly introduce this panel. So we hope you enjoyed the coffee break and everything. So we'll now continue our program with a panel discussion on the potential of the deliberative democracy methods and participatory tools for enhancing civic and political engagement among youth. So the panel will be moderated by my colleague, Alexandre Thierry, who is working at FedExio as a communication and project manager. So I leave the stage to you, Alex.
Welcome back, everyone. So we have 5 speakers today, so we'll ask you to keep it short, only 7 minutes per speaker. So here on my left, I have Mr. Mateusz Tokarski from the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. Next to him, we have David Talukder from the Center for the Future of Democracy from the University of Cambridge. Then we have Rhys Farting from the Research Associate at the Information Law and Policy Center, University of London. Then Andrea Grus from the Institute for Social Research in Zagreb. And finally, Mr. Jean-Benoît Pilet from Brussels, Free University of Brussels. So I will first give the stage to Rhys Farting. I give you the floor.
I'll try this one. Can people hear me if I use this? No? Okay. All right, I'll use this one and I'll turn that one off to avoid echo. Is that better? Brilliant. Okay. Thank you for having me. Firstly, it's lovely to meet you and I'm really delighted to be here. But I do feel like a bit of a fraud on this esteemed panel. So let me see if I can live up to the standard of our other speakers and the speakers before as well. I was very much asked to kick off this session by offering a provocation. Something to think about as we move from the theory of deliberative democracy that we talked about earlier to the process of deliberative action that people will be unpacking over the next few days. Now, I took that brief very seriously, and I think the conference organisers might learn a very fun lesson about asking an Australian to be provocative, and hopefully we'll have some fun with this too. So here we go. I decided to kick us off by posing the enraging but very real question of why bother? Why bother with deliberation? And try and unpack a little bit that age-old question of, is it really worth it? And I'm going to offer 3 very quick answers to that, which I'm then going to undo very quickly with 3 reasons not to do it as well. So on one level, this provocation, why bother, has a very theoretical answer. We bother, we try to create these youth-inclusive deliberative spaces because it's a democratic imperative. Now, no matter what your vision, your ideal vision of democracy is, whether it's representative, direct, participatory, any of the other theories that you might hear about, some form of authentic deliberation is necessary in any one of those democracies for them to work. And no matter what your belief about the extent of political franchise, there has to be some space for the young to engage. So even if you don't think that young people should vote, there's a really strong argument for engaging young people to develop their political muscle and share their very current expertise before they vote. So this means that we actually grow democracy. We improve democracy when we use deliberation, and we can actually make democratic institutions stronger through the process. But there's also 2 related pragmatic answers. So secondly, you could bother with youth deliberation because it can make genuinely positive changes. Now, I know that tomorrow you're going to unpack some really great examples and case studies of where it's worked with a lot more time and in a lot more depth. But I spoke to someone in the coffee break who said that examples were really welcome. So I'll give you 2 examples of where I've seen it work just in my own space. So I've seen it make really small local changes. And one in particular, it seems so local and so obvious, but I genuinely saw a deliberative space open up in a school that led to a change where young people from, in this school, before this little deliberative space, young people from low-income households, so poor kids who were generally the hungry kids, there were a series of hilarious rules. After home economics class, after cooking class, they had to throw their food in the bin while the richer peers got to eat their food. Now, that's a ridiculous situation, and I've seen deliberation just turn that around in half an hour because people realised how ridiculous it was. But I've also seen it work in really big, broad spaces. So I've seen youth deliberation, like engagement in deliberation, catalyse broader privacy reforms, so privacy regulation for California that just got implemented. I've seen it work at all of these different levels. So deliberation can actually lead to better decision making and better outcomes from policy, which also, I guess, just strengthens democracy. And thirdly, again, a sort of pragmatic response. Through deliberative actions, through creating these genuinely meaningful deliberative experiences, we can grow democratic experience within young people. So the young people who experience actually can grow a bit of democratic muscle. And this can further, I guess, strengthen democracy again by enhancing the capabilities of young people who are both current citizens, but also conveniently happen to be the citizens of tomorrow as well. So those are my three admittedly very quick answers to why bother. I'm sure that people on the panel have much better or way more thought through answers, but those are three super quick ones. But I think the better question actually for a provocation is actually, why not bother? Or why wouldn't it be worth it? And we've also seen plenty of examples at youth inclusive deliberation that absolutely fail. So deliberations with anyone, but especially and particularly young people, often require significant power shifts to work. And if young people do not or cannot have power in these deliberative processes that we set up, well, we're all in a pickle. And usually I think I see this happen where it's a planned project rather than an organic deliberation, but where insufficient consideration has been given to those power dynamics involved, where adults have prescribed what the issue we're going to be looking at is, here are the sets of processes that young people could go through, and then we get to the end and we wonder why we're struggling to find young people who are engaged, or we're struggling to see sort of meaningful change happen as a result of it. And I think, sadly, that the bulk of the projects that I've seen with young people actually fit within that brackets. But the risk of failure alone is no reason not to try, right? Like, you don't not try to do something because you could fail. So that would be a really rubbish provocation to give the panel, except that I have seen these failures cause harm. As you mentioned, a backlash. They can harm in two key ways. So firstly, young people's time and energy should not be considered worthless, and these can be squandered and wasted where projects are ill-conceived and doomed to fail from the outset. That's a genuine harm. But secondly, and possibly more importantly, I've seen projects absorb and squander all of that incredible energy from enthusiastic, optimistic young people, and then spit them out the other end as actually politically apathetic and politically disengaged. So done badly, attempts at democracy can actually demonstrate that nobody wants to listen to young people, and that young people can't actually make meaningful change, even if they really put their back into it. And in effect, this means that it can entrench the very power imbalances that it sought to remedy. Done badly, it can reduce the democratic capacity of young people. It can astroturf poor decisions and reinforce rubbish policy and actually weaken democracy. So my provocation is actually this. There are plenty of reasons to justify the excellent projects that I know everyone in here is about to kick off, and plenty of examples for you to follow where deliberation has been a hugely powerful tool to improve democracy, improve policy making, and improve the democratic capacity among young people. But there's also plenty of reasons not to do it, and plenty of bad examples that you absolutely do want to avoid. And I'd urge you to consider both these potentials of deliberative democracy and the risks, and how power needs to be shaped or reshaped as you develop your projects going forward.
Thank you for your provocative introduction. Now I will give the floor to Mr. Jean-Benoît Pilet, who will discuss how do citizen and youth in particular perceive deliberative democracy.
Take this one. Okay, thank you. So I'll build a bit on what I've said earlier today, which is we should not start with the assumption that everybody wants to participate more. And I think that applies to younger citizens as well. So first, what do we know about the way deliberative democracy and the idea of setting up more deliberative events within our representative democracy system? What do we know about how the public perceives that? What we actually know is that the public is widely divided on whether you should increase citizen participation or not. And it's widely divided regarding deliberative democracy. We see first a group of people who strongly disagree, want a democratic system with less participation, potentially more decisive participation, but less often. What we don't really see is, even among the most authoritarian, we see that they still want some capacity to act if things turns out badly, but we should not. So we first have a group who wants to participate less. Then among those who wants to participate more, we have disagreement regarding whether it should be a more consultative way of involving citizens, and those who really want a more direct democracy model where citizens will directly participate and decide. Those divides are also found among the younger citizens. So what I'm saying here is based on a survey of about 25,000 citizens across Europe. And what we see is that the younger citizens are also deeply divided, but slightly differently. You find a group who wants to participate less, who want less institutionalized participation, but you also find a group who wants more participation, but that group would then be pushing much more in the direction of binding forms of citizen participation. So support for a consultative model of deliberative democracy, where you organize citizen assemblies that would make recommendation, but then it's left to representative institution to decide. That's something where support is smaller among younger citizens than among the rest of the public. But that raises the question of why we should expect them to be interested in deliberative democracy. And I think what we should do is to connect it to what we know and what research has shown about political engagement of younger citizens and how different it is from the political engagement of older generation. And if we look at this literature, we find several reasons why we should not expect young citizens to be willing to take part to deliberative democracy. First, we know that there is a life cycle effect regarding political engagement. We know that the willingness to engage in politics grows as citizens start working, get their own apartment or house, and start having a family. There we see, and that's something that research has shown for many decades, that participation is increasing. And so if you look at citizens that are before that, these different steps, milestones in life, we know that they are less willing to engage. So why would that be different for deliberative democracy? We also know that they disengage a lot from conventional and institutionalized forms of participation. It's not so much that younger citizens nowadays are less politically interested. It's just that they're less interested in institutionalized conventional participation. But they do politicize other actions much more than earlier generation. And so the question is, deliberative democracy, would that be perceived as an institutionalized, conventional forms of participation, or is it going to be perceived as a new, non-institutionalized, unconventional form of participation? Second, something that we should keep in mind is that when we talk about younger citizens, we should not forget about the inequalities that we find in the rest of the public. What the willingness to take part to deliberative democracy might be higher among, and is actually higher among citizens who are young, but who are better educated, coming from more politicized family, and coming from the majority groups in terms of cultural diversity. So I would not expect a lot of enthusiasm to be found in the participation of younger citizens in deliberative democracy. And that's what you see when you look at those who accept to participate, for example, to citizen assembly. Yet, there are also elements that might lead us to be a bit more optimistic. First, if indeed deliberative democracy is framed and is perceived as an alternative to traditional politics, then you have a potential for greater engagement among the younger citizens. Second, what we also see is that the younger generations tend to be more interested in shorter forms of participation, meaning in being extremely active for a short period of time and then moving to another cause or to another activity. And so if you think of deliberative democracy as a way to get engaged for a short period of time but intensively, that might also be attractive. And finally, we know that the main determinants of the willingness to participate is education. And as on average, if you take a generational perspective, the younger generations tend to be more educated than what was the situation after the Second World War, for example, you might also expect participation. So if I go back to this research that has been done on the participation and the support for models of participation, I would first start by killing the assumption, no, it's not going to happen. You're not going to have everyone in any generation, but especially among the younger generation, to be willing to participate. There are barriers to overcome that would even push younger citizens away from deliberative democracy, but there are also ways to change that for at least some of them. And that's how much you frame it as something institutional and that looks like normal politics, or how much you frame it as something new. Second, the question of intensive but shorter engagement. And third, the question of diversity among the younger generation. So that was also the short ideas that I wanted to put on the table.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Andrea Grush. She will talk about unconventional youth participation, leading the way toward greater institutionalized participation.
Yes, hello everyone. I was invited here to talk about the tool that we recently developed that can be used for measuring unconventional youth participation. But before we talk about the tool in itself, we have to address what participation is and what actually constitutes political participation. And this is an issue that has been long going in the literature. For example, older researchers usually say that participation can only be looked at in terms of conventional participation. For example, voter turnout, which when you're dealing with youth is not exactly a good measure, especially because, you know, in many countries, youth can vote when they turn 18. And I mean, what happens before? I mean, they do exist before they are 18. So we actually proposed a framework that uses latent and manifest form of participation, which actually leads to conventional participation in the future. What is latent participation? It actually encompasses behaviors that can be deemed pre-political. For example, some kid that is going to first grade in high school reads a lot of news, follows news, it interacts with people on social media and talks about debates about political issues or happenings in the world. That can actually be deemed pre-political behavior because maybe that person somewhere further along the road will be motivated to go to the elections, to vote, to maybe become a member of a parliamentary party or something. Then we have the manifest participation, which, like I mentioned, this person reads, and he reads something about Nestle being really bad company. So he or she decides to boycott that company. That would be manifest participation. And then someone along the road, that person decides that he will vote for the party that actually opposes what Nestle stands for and uses people for. So having that idea in mind, we developed a tool that measures pre-political behavior, and also their willingness to participate, which we then correlated. We are currently writing an article for it, so maybe some of you will read it somewhere further down. But what we found in the testing of the tool is that young people actually are willing to participate in stuff that's not actually that does not have a strong political connotation. So they will volunteer, they will include themselves in some humanitarian happenings. They are willing to boycott some products, but when it comes to voting, not so much. So this tool helps you to see when are the kids willing to participate, what are they willing to do, and also it helps you to see where are they most active, because we ask them, how do you get your news? Do you converse with your friends about it? Do you follow social media? And it's not surprising that the most often they answer that they use social media on a daily basis. So that can also be used to approach young people, because they do not get the news and they don't function as old people do when it comes to their social circle. They spend most of their time on social media. So if a person or if a policymaker wants to make a new policy that's intended for the youth, that policymaker should make adverts on TikTok, because that's how stuff works today for the youth. So yeah, in general, that's it about the tool. It should somewhere, maybe in a year or so, it should be available for public. It's copyrighted by UNICEF, so it will be on their website probably, but it should be used for policymakers, for different NGOs, and whoever is interested to measure youth participation among their community, and then maybe see and compare that youth participation with other participation in other counties, countries, or whatever. That's it.
Thank you. Next one, we have David Talukder. So you will talk about how can deliberative democracy can be useful or not for your political participation. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, so it's here. All right. So hello, everybody. So today I'm going to discuss about this question, and I'll try to provide a very short answer to it. So how can deliberative democracy be useful or not for youth people? But before discussing about it, I would like first to discuss a bit about the crisis of representative democracy and its challenges. So why are we actually moving toward deliberative democracy, and how deliberative democracy could be an answer to some of the challenges. And then I will discuss a bit about the advantages of deliberative democracy for citizens in general and for youth as well, but also about the risks. And if you want a very short answer about the question, it's that deliberative democracy could be a useful tool for youth, for sure, but, and there is always a but, the processes matters a lot. And so we need to take care of the process to be sure that it goes well. But first of all, let's discuss about the crisis of representative democracy. So I guess that you are all familiar with words such as, oh yeah, is it over there? Yeah, all right. with words such as the democratic malaise or democratic deficit that we can also find in the literature or in the press. We can also have news heads with words such as lack of trust of citizens toward politicians, toward justice, toward the institution, and so on. So it's something that we have studied in the literature for the last days. And there are basically four criticism that we can, or four challenges that we can underline when it comes to representative democracy. So one of those is the incongruence between public decision and the wish of citizens. So basically, sometimes decisions are taken by the government that goes against what citizens want. It could be for very rational reason or very diverse reason, but it could be one of the reasons about why citizens to be dissatisfied with representative democracy. Another one could be related to the growing gap between political parties and citizens. So the literature says that more and more the political parties tend to be anchored within the government and less within the civil society, which makes it difficult for citizens to reach political parties and might make them less satisfied about representative democracy as well. There is again the challenge of decreasing level of trust and support that we can see across time. So it's decreasing. Citizens tend to be less satisfied about multiple institutions and so on. And it's related to the challenges of representative democracy of nowadays. And another one that we can also underline is the lack of participatory opportunities. So again, in representative democracy, the main form of participation is supposed to be the vote. It doesn't mean that you're not allowed to participate with unconventional mode of participation, or you cannot be asked to give your opinion by the government, but vote remains the main way of participating in politics. So this could also be a challenge, and deliberative democracy tries to actually answer somehow to some of those challenges by providing a space for citizens to speak, give their opinion, and exchange arguments with other citizens. So this could be a solution for sure. So if we go back to the opportunities, so deliberative democracy is a useful tool, and several studies have actually studied how people feel about it. So how do they support it or not, but also what happens to the people who participate. And actually studies tend to show that citizens tend to feel more politically capable, more politically efficacious by actually participating in such kind of events. So they're able to discuss with citizens, to exchange arguments, to have a better positioning, to defend their position and so on. So they feel better after using it. It can also have a positive impact when it comes to the evaluation of institution, but we have mixed effects. So it's very unlikely that doing a deliberative mini public at a local municipality will have an impact on how much you trust the European Union. Obviously, it's too far. But when it comes to the level in which the deliberative mini public is implemented, you tend to have some modification and higher level of trust when it comes to the political institution. So this could be also an advantage when it comes to having new way to make democracy. When it comes to younger citizens, what we can see is that it could increase their confidence in the political field. So we can have impact in terms of exchange of argument, being able to master a political question, having the opportunity to exchange with other citizens, politicians, and so on. It could increase the knowledge on a specific topic as well, and increase their ability in general. So there are like huge potential for deliberative democracy, but with potentials comes also risk, and we'll discuss about it. And this is very important. It has been slightly discussed today, but deliberative democracy starts with the assumption that all the citizens are equal when once they enter the deliberative process. We are discussing about inequalities, about participation, like joining the mini publics. But when the people are there, sometimes we tend to think that, okay, they are there and all the people are equal in deliberations. Well, it's not necessarily true. And sometimes it's more the reverse. people tend to be very unequal when it comes to deliberation, because you need to use specific tools such as being confident, being able to construct a discourse, being able to convince people. So those are also specific skills as well. And we can see that there are lots of inequalities that are already there in the space. So depending on your gender, you might actually speak less than the others. You might be given less the power to talk as well. When it comes to the age, I don't know if you remember how you were when you were 16 or 18, and how you were when you were 25, and how you are when you are 40. It's a huge difference. There's much more experience, you're much more different, and so on. And it will impact as well your ability to speak in a group when there are people from different backgrounds as well. And it's not only with general population, there is also among the young huge level of inequality. So depending on the school you come from, depending on what kind of education you have, depending on the income of your parents, if you had like the ability to do extra activities and so on, you might feel more confident to take the lead in such a discussion and so on. And actually it might increase inequalities even among the younger population. And this could actually if it's not well done, if the process is not well done, it can actually have a reverse effect among the young people and diminish their confidence and their abilities and so on. So this is also something very important that we need to have in mind when it comes to deliberative democracy. Yeah. Yes. And as a conclusion, so deliberative democracy has several strengths for younger citizens in terms of experience and so on. But it needs to take into account inclusivity, and all the risks that I have talked about can be overcome if the process is done well. So if the facilitation process is working well, if all those elements are taken into account, if confidence are given to the participant and so on, it might be possible to actually overcome those risks and benefit hugely from deliberative democracy. So thank you very much for your attention.
And last but not least, Mateusz Tokarski. So you will tell us about learning with and from youth.
Thank you. Yes, and I'm really happy that I will be able, I hope, to link into several things that were said in this session, in the previous session, in a very concrete example, let's say. So start at the beginning, I work at the Competence Center on Participatory and Deliberative Democracy, which means we're a group in the Commission who helps other services, other groups who want to implement some participatory processes, and we support them with training, guidance. Sometimes what we do is piloting participatory processes or experimenting with participatory processes of very different kinds, not necessarily deliberative, and definitely not necessarily panels and assemblies, very often quite small, quite non-conventional, non-traditional processes as well. And we're more of a research team, so we happily have space to experiment. And we have run some projects that focused on youth, on different topics, and starting with primary school kids being involved in the decision of how meals in school canteens should look, all the way to young adults being involved in biodiversity conservation projects, or expanding the debate around certain biodiversity issues. And I think it's really important when engaging youth to also think about very concretely the process where they go in and engage with each other, and what actually happens when they are there to do the group work or talk with each other. And if you get this right, you really can engage very, very many different groups of them. And one of the things that's always sort of in my head when I do this or help others do this, or see other processes and study them, it's about how to help those who will be in the process really thrive in that process, and how to let them bring out their best in that process. And I think it's especially important in the sort of invited processes organized by institutions like the European Commission, which might feel very far, very political, very sort of standard and structured. So we really have to go extra mile here to do that. And I want to just bring one example of a process we did a few years ago, which was about involving youth in contributing to a debate on protection of wild pollinating insects. Super concrete, super narrow, very important, but very narrow that nobody really knows much about in the general public. Very few of the young people have any intrinsic sort of interest in the topic, if they at all have heard about it. So how do you bring them into the process and start working with them? So the process that we supported and funded, the expert we worked with went to a local youth center where young people already go to get help with education, or get help with looking for work, or get borrow equipment that they don't have money to buy to have themselves. And we started with a sort of, and this is already a first important step, I think. The thing happened not in a parliament or a conference center or any other of these formal democracy rooms. It happened in the center, in their neighborhood, the place where they're familiar with, where they go already anyway, where they're confident already with the place and with the people that are there. So this was first way to sort of ground the process meaningfully in their life. The second was to start talking with them. How do you think this process could look? What would make sense to you? Many of them were interested in filmmaking. They were learning that, borrowing cameras to go around, do films, you know. So in the end, we built, the whole process was built around filmmaking. They were learning about the topic through watching and discussing films. They were then actually discussing the topics with each other through developing scripts, trying out scenes, building characters, dialogues, all that. So you had an actual debate, you had a sort of deliberation, but that was happening through a method, a tool, or an approach that was familiar to them, that they knew how to engage with, they knew what to do with it, you know. So and this was a second way of grounding this in their life, in what they already know. And yeah, I mean, this, so in summary, because I can sum up here, I think this is also a way to really make sure that we can bring people in to these processes and give them opportunity to really thrive by being also themselves and by making this meaningful. And even if the topic is not immediately something that attracts them, the method is they do something that they're interested in and passionate in already. And you know, the outcome might not be a formal recommendation. It was in fact TikTok videos that they posted on TikTok and engaged with their community on TikTok and started conversation there through a medium that was actually familiar also to their peers. Yeah, so I wanted to bring in this example because I think it shows that if we sort of stay open to the very concrete methods that we use there, it might really also help out with how many of these processes are run, and it really helps with the quality and with the fairness, because this also feeds back to the discussion of ability to speak and the discursivity. I mean, there is a old critique of deliberation that it privileges the sort of rational discourse, which is not necessarily something that everyone is so familiar with. But you know, it might be filmmaking, it may be drawing, it may be something else. It's really our imagination is here the only thing that can stop us and limit us in that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's important to have this bottom-up approach and start with very concrete cases. Now we have 30 minutes left for Q&A. So if any of you have questions, you can. Anyone? Oh, you want?
Good afternoon. My name is Willem de Bruin, and I have the question, have you ever thought about getting youth involved by first presenting them with the problems you're going to discuss which interest them, rather than problems you want to discuss which interest you? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things I was talking about when I talk about power shifts. It's who frames the problem. And I think one of the most interesting deliberative projects I've ever done with young people was in Moss Side in Manchester, which is, for those of you who are familiar with the UK, a really deprived area, and it's known as the gun capital of the UK. It's quite gang entrenched. There's a lot of issues in Moss Side. And I work bottom up with young people. So I recruited the young people who I worked with from outside a fish and chip store. I sat outside a fish and chip store just talking to young people as they came and went about what could happen, what we were going to do. And we actually worked in that fish and chip store. That's where most of our work actually happened. But what I did, or in that, or the type of work that I do always lets young people bring their problem set to the table. And what I found really interesting was that everyone was saying, oh my God, you're going to Moss Side, you're going to get issues of poverty that they're going to work on, poor housing, guns, gangs, these will be the problem set you work on. No. These were not privileged kids from Moss Side who were working with. These were young people who were affected by all of those problems. The issue that they really cared about was the fact that Moss Side had no recycling bins, but the rich neighbourhoods around them, they all had recycling bins in their houses. They weren't keen environmentalists. This wasn't about this, but this was about the dignity of the fact that the local council had not given them recycling bins because they didn't think they'd be interested in recycling their rubbish. And that was a project that we worked on, that we did loads of work, that we connected with the council on, that we actually sort of changed recycling targets for the region and got more recycling bins in the region and through the houses. But those young people were so keen to keep working on that because that was their issue that they came with. And in a month of Sundays, you could have put every expert in Manchester together and said, what do young people care about? And I'm not sure that any of them would have come to recycling bins. But if you actually take that first step back and sort of say, well, what are the issues that young people care about, and how can we elevate those into the sort of formal political processes, you get quite different work happening.
Can I relate to that? Because I'm also curious about the politicians, because they left out this quarter of the city. What did they learn from this?
The question was, what did the politicians learn from this? And I think that's really interesting. So my way of working is literally from the bottom up, and you go to the top. And I have never had, I know that one of the issues you were talking about earlier is that you only get a 2% response rate, and that can be a real problem. I have never had I have had problems of having to turn young people away at the last session saying, I'm so sorry, we're closing, we're finishing, But what I have constantly is, what is it, the phrase, cloth-eared politicians? So the inability of people who have people who have power to want to share any with young people who've come up with these great solutions. You've engaged them, you've then involved other people with power in the deliberation processes, and it's like, okay, it's time to make this meaningful. Like, what do you think? And that is always the issue. And what I've tend to found is the smaller, I don't know if you found this, the smaller and more local the issue, the more chance you have of making a change. The sort of bigger and broader the issue, the more difficult it is, because I think there's so many different perspective sets to balance off. but it can be, you know, the question of young people's engagement and young people's effort, I think is always balanced against the effort and willingness of those with power to listen to the young.
Hi everyone, I'm Ilyas. My question is to Dr. David. You mentioned that young people can be silenced by people who are older and more experienced. But my question is that how can we ensure that young people have an equal voice in deliberative democracy processes regardless of their socio-economic status or level of education?
Yes, thank you for this very interesting question. So when it comes to deliberative processes, so there are multiple elements that allows you to actually diminish as much as you can the inequalities by, for example, giving first the opportunity to talk to younger people, for example, so that they can express their opinion first. Then the moderator can also actually balance the discussion. So when someone say something offensive like you're too young, you don't know how life is like, so I don't trust you, then the people who's in charge of moderating the discussion can actually balance it and give more weight or actually correct a bit the discussion so that they have an equal opportunity to express themselves. But this is what is visible for what is in the inside. So when someone do not want to talk because they are afraid of the reaction of the others, then it becomes a bit more difficult. So there are some techniques that are used by professionals, but still it's very complicated, I think, and it's one of the issue that we should think about a lot when we are implementing this kind of initiatives.
Somebody else has a question?
Thank you, all the panelists, for this amazing discussion. I'd like to take a step back, actually, and ask you about raising awareness, political awareness among youth, not just youth. Professor Jean Benoit, he mentioned Brazil, and it made me think about the 13 years that PT, the party, was in power, and then we had Bolsonaro. I'm Brazilian, so the question that we are always asking ourselves is, and we had 13 years, and then where is the political awareness between people, you know? So I'd like to ask you about the potential of the raising awareness methods and raising awareness tools for enhancing civic and political engagement among youth.
Can you just, because I'm not entirely sure, so what do you mean by political awareness? Because the fact that another party is winning the election, even with authoritarian attitudes, does not mean that it's not political. So can you just clarify a bit?
It doesn't mean, but in this case it did. Because in the elections, people were like, they didn't have any political awareness, in the sense that they didn't care. I don't care. I just want this new guy because he makes these promises, and I don't like the other guy. So it was more like, I don't like the other guy and I like this guy. It's more like a personal thing than a political and social thing.
Okay. I don't know specifically about younger citizens, but and David would know it even better than I do. But there have been quite some studies on people participating to deliberative events and how it affects their political attitudes. And you don't have that much of an effect, except on indeed their political knowledge, their interest for politics. So we don't see a major effect in broader political attitudes like satisfaction with democracy or trust in parliaments or things like that. But you might see that in the individual level, in terms of confidence in your ability to have a say and to have an influence in a debate, and your interest for politics, your knowledge of politics, you see an effect. What remains unclear is how much of this effect would stay in the longer run, and I think that connects to what you're doing, because the studies that I've seen, and I've taken part to some of them, tend to follow former participants for a few weeks or a few months, but a real life cycle study that would follow people on the longer run is still missing. So I can tell you that there is good evidence that those tools might help to make more politically interested and politically active citizens in the short run. Whether it's having an impact on the longer run, that remains, from that perspective of participants, unclear. But I think there is probably more in those studies that start from, you talk about politics, and then how is it going to turn to when you're, I don't know, 25 rather than 16?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a good example with the US elections 2020, where there was a huge voter turnout among young voters because they were motivated. And I'm not sure if it can be connected to social media, but the posts that I've personally seen have been targeted towards young voters, and the stuff has been discussed thoroughly among young people, especially, for example, on Reddit. I mean, there were daily discussions about U.S. politics, and I think that even for people that usually avoid political news, it was unavoidable. And so this is the pre-political behavior that I was talking about, coming to play, because when you read about stuff and when you are more informed about the actual happenings, so that can lead towards better institutionalized participation.
So I'd like to
I would just like to follow up on the Manchester case. It sounds very fascinating. And I would just kind of like to learn a bit more about the specifics, because there's been like a lot of academic jargon flying around, but I am interested in like the replicability of your case. So in terms of self-selection, was it then the case you said like the students, they come up to you to participate in this project, and you also mentioned something about their background? You had like also less privileged students joining. Was there involvement of the school or not? How did they perceive you as a researcher? I can imagine some students would be like, okay, wow, it's like a doctor coming to us. Are we that special, background, age, also maybe Mr. Tokarski, maybe if you could also maybe explain a bit more about like some of the factors that's played in a role in your example, also in terms of like the age. Did you see a difference in attitudes towards participation in different ages? I don't know if the ages were like very divergent or not. So could you tell a bit more in terms of how to replicate? What are your takeaways? How could you improve these kinds of examples? Thank you very much. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm cognizant that we might be trying to wrap up soon, so is that right? Still have time? Okay, all right, sorry. Oh, okay. I promise I won't take that long. Yeah, I mean, I did that exact same project I did in Manchester, in 5 other parts of the UK as well. So it's sort of replicable. I'm really happy to talk to you about how to do it. The piece about, was it self-selection? It was, and it took a lot of time, but the young people who took part, so I worked with young people sort of 12 to 16-ish by and large, they brought their friends. So it started out that once you had 1 or 2 young people and you built trust and you spent time, and I did some really weird things. I did a lot of prep working in making Australian cakes. I'm not a baker. I also don't really eat cake, but I taught every young person who I worked with how to cook like at least 3 Australian cakes, because that was just something to do while we talked and built trust. And then after we'd done that, and I sort of said, look, this is what I'm trying to do. This is what we're looking at. Trust was there. They bought friends and stuff. So I think that was sort of on the recruitment. I can talk to you a bit more about that, but I think there's a sort of key part about authenticity, turning up and genuinely meaning that you're going to listen to what young people say, and genuinely listening to what they say plays a huge part in it, to be honest. So yeah, I think it's just a different way of doing things. And I think in the UK it's a bit easier because there's a strong youth work background. So in the UK and Australia, and also little bits in Canada and the US. And so it taps into that tradition, and those institutes are there, and that cultural knowledge of how to do this.
So on replicability, I think in principle there is no issue. The issue is that, well, this process, but a lot of these processes are very specific in terms of what do you do with how the process looks like. So there are certain, let's say, methods and tools you use throughout the process. I don't know, the brainstorming activities, whatever, the exercises you do for futuring or imagining the future, or for putting down something concrete on paper. They are replicable. They can be used in different contexts with different themes. It doesn't have to be filmmaking. It could be something completely different. So the structure is sort of there. Then of course, it depends who you work with, how you work with. We worked with an expert who was a facilitator, but also I think it's called a youth worker, something like that. So he was already also a bit more familiar with the area, with the neighborhood. You can start working immediately with a youth association, or with a youth club or youth center, where there are also people who usually tend to also be familiar with some of the workshop work, for instance, of facilitation, because they work with teenagers, kids, or the young adults on a daily basis, so we can work with them. I mean, I don't know. We can talk later specifically about recommendations and all that, because it's more of sharing a report with that, I think. So we can also get together later.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm Catherine, and I'm doing a workshop in a little while, and we're doing a democracy fitness session. So I hope to see a lot of you there. And I have really tried to pose my question, and I want you to, all of you, prepare a yes or no to this question. And so my question is, does the words democracy and politics need a less boring reputation? Yes or no? Because, and why? I find that when we go out and do democracy fitness sessions, I meet a lot of people, not only young people, also older people, who are very engaged, and they like to participate, and they are happy when they participate. But whenever we are told this is democracy, people are like, or do you engage in politics? Hell no. Sorry, my language. So yes or no?
Yes, and if there's time, I would like to bring in something.
Well, I'll say yes, but I'm biased, so I would also say no. So yeah, we can discuss that later for sure.
I'm going to say no, because it's not a rebranding exercise. It actually needs to fundamentally change.
I'd say yes. From personal experience, when I went to schools doing the research, as soon as the kids saw politics, it was like, nope, nope, get me out of here.
I'd say yes too.
Just about this question of making it more attractive and using non-formal different alternative forms of democracy. Don't you think, for instance, you mentioned, Andrea, that if politicians nowadays want to do a campaign, they need to be on TikTok. But don't you think as soon as they will come, it will look old-fashioned?
Yeah, but we'll never know if they never try. So, I mean, I think that politicians in general need to approach young people, because at least in Croatia, we're not seeing that, and the voter turnout among young people is barely there. So, I mean, there's nothing else left to do than try to approach young people via social media.
Hello, I'm Olivia. I'm so sorry, I'm not sure I catch the names. So, Dr. Rees, and I'm so sorry. It's both about the experience in Manchester and about the pollinators, insects. So once you have, you know what they care about recycling bins and what solutions they give, or once you have the film, what was the influence of that on the political level, but also what the young people actually involved in trying to gain influence, like in trying to reach out to the politicians? Were they also involved in that discussion, or you had the result and then, like, I don't know, the adults tried to reach out to politicians? That's it. Thank you.
The project with pollinators wasn't really designed to bring, let's say, recommendations to the politicians. It was much more focused on contributing to, let's say, a public discussion, public debate, building of narratives that circulate in a world. And I think it's not something to be dismissed, because what happens with, I don't know, a war in Ukraine, first on the lines are trolls on social media building a narrative about this to have the power over thinking of how we think about this. So I think in this sense, it wasn't again, the sort of classical assembly process where you have a direct line then with recommendations going to the politicians. They have to decide, say yes or no, why. It was much more of a distributed, dissolved idea of political space and democratic space as a public space, public debate. But I mean, I don't know. I remember, for instance, from COFE, there were several young people who I kept on seeing again and again in some meetings, in some reports and some statements that got really, really involved and really committed to the ideas that came out of this process from the Conference on the Future of Europe, and took further this and tried to work to bring more visibility to these ideas. So I think that in this sense, there's always some who sort of find themselves in this process and want to continue being active and bringing this idea further.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think, like you, that my example is mixed. So I did that project in 5 different parts of the UK, and in each area, the reaction or the ability of that to connect with politics was completely mixed. And it was about opportunity, timing, who we knew, what we could do, what the resources were. And there were some regions where, there was one area where I worked where the local authority, when we sort of reached out and said, hey, look, there's a group of young people, they've done this work, said, these young people are not our young mayor. Therefore, this is an inappropriate experience and you should stop working with them. Like, actually actively tried to gag young people who tried to get together and do a process of deliberation. There were other local authorities who were just like, this is amazing, give us this. But these young people are coming and joining our, next town hall meeting and we've got their policies. Right the way through, I was really lucky. I connected with an all-party parliamentary group. So there was the opportunity to take this work in to work with MPs around what was going on, and that had sort of differential results as well. And again, it depended on who the MP was, what was going on in their region, what it worked. So it was sort of quite hit and miss, and I think that shows that there's both opportunities but also big barriers. But like you say, I think the most interesting thing, and this is not why I do it, I do not do deliberation because I think young people lack democratic skills and we need to skill them up so they do that. That is not where I come from. But one of the more interesting things was watching young people find themselves in this process, and some of the young people I've worked with who are amazing and had all sorts of opportunities and great things in their lives, but were demonstrably considered some of the most disadvantaged young people, went on to do really brilliant things, including like one area, the youngest ever counsellor was a young person who, after finishing our project and our work together, waited until the day they could register to go on and go on the ballot to be a counsellor, and got voted in by their community, which I thought was pretty powerful to see.
We have a very last question.
So I'm Sina Avarai from the Baha'i International Community here in Brussels. So it was also building up a little bit on what Dr. Tokarski was saying about building on the grassroots and the initiatives that, or the talents that are there at the grassroots, and also seeing from what we observed on our side of how, and the question was around the potential of social cohesion in community building at the local level in enhancing civic and political engagement in youth. Yes, and how we saw on our side how in places where there are initiatives at the local level and there's spaces where and activities where people can interact and know each other, then from these informal spaces, it's a good soil for issues to be informally discussed and matters, and then to attract also, to have initiatives that rise and then attract also the local authorities. So it's a general question on your experience and what you see is the potential of a greater social cohesion at the local level in making those deliberative spaces more sustained in time and also more efficient. And then another question, which is maybe linked, on the value of informal deliberative spaces at the local level.
Want to answer?
I don't know if it's an answer, it's an endorsement. I mean, I think the informal deliberative spaces it's fantastic to do it there. I mean, I don't know, in a skate park, on a playground or football field or wherever. I mean, you can do it whenever, and I think it's again coming back to what I said. This is the place where people are, where places that are meaningful, that they care for. I think maybe another thing I would add is to do the engagement in places where the issue is. So, example, we run another project about biodiversity and farming, and we did it. We did the discussions actually on the farms. And I mean, today, hardly anyone goes to a farm and has an idea how a farm looks or works. So how are they to deliberate on that? So we organize everything on the farm, with the farmer acting also as a host, presenting what happens, how it looks. And then you have this direct engagement with the issue when it happens. And I think it also performs an important role, because it's easy to escape into these sort of predetermined catchphrases and positions that you already have. It's when you're discussing things in the abstract, but when you're actually directly confronted with some issue, I think you're much more forced almost to be honest with yourself and with others that. Okay, well, yeah, this is an issue. I know I voted for the other party that says that it's not an issue, but yeah, okay, I cannot say it's not. it's maybe idealistic, but I think there is something in that.
Thank you. We need to conclude, unfortunately. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. I hope. Thank you to the panelists as well. Thank you for your inspiring speeches. I hope we all have a better idea of the stakes of youth participation. And now we have some workshops. I will, Ludmila, you can.
Thank you. Thank you again for the session. Thank you for participation. We will now try to have some fun after these serious discussions. Very enlightening. And we will have 3 different workshops, okay? So normally all of you already registered, sign up for one of those. For the first workshop, Democracy Fitness, it will take place here. So if you register for this one, please stay here. The workshop, the second workshop, Deliberative Democracy, Diversity and Inclusion, it will take place downstairs. There is a cozy place there for some informal discussions.